Hello again, I'm Tripp Rogers, and he is the Hall of Famer Mike Sheck. We are the Fantasy Sultans, getting ready for week number 3 in the NFL. And, I saw this on Twitter. The last Monday night game of the season last year, DeMar Hamlin. The first Monday night game of this year, Aaron Rodgers. The second Monday night game this year, Nick Chubb.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a Monday Night Football curse? I'm just saying. I
know.
Well, again, when you talk about Nick Chubb, I mean, that is just that is a my fiance's brother-in-law was a Browns fan and just said season's over. And I really can't argue that point. I can't. Of course, if you have Nick Chubb, your fantasy season, maybe not over, but on life support at this point. I can't even.
What are the
celebrate.
options, though? Yeah, but what are the options for Cleveland at this point? Because, there's talks about maybe they're going to bring in Kareem Hunt. Jerome Ford had a nice night on Monday night, filling in for Chubb. But and of course, Leonard Fournette. You've got Cam Akers out there as a possibility too. He's being reported as possibly going on the trading block for the Rams. Who knows what's going to happen? But hey, Cleveland's success rolls through the $230 million quarterback of Deshaun Watson, and maybe a little foreshadowing, Tripp. A little export from him. You're going to be exporting him, right?
That's right. Well, hang on a second. We do have to talk about the big fantasy story of the week.
Oh, yeah.
I beat you.
I
beat you. Okay. That's the big fantasy story of the week. Now, again, you touched on it, but I want to throw another name in there. What about Jonathan Taylor? Because the Browns may be motivated at this point to make a deal with the Colts. The only problem is I don't think they have any first round picks, and that's what the Colts want. But if it's a situation when you're motivated, you'll try and make it work somehow. I'm going to throw this also out there real quick before we really get into the meat and potatoes of our show tonight, or our podcast, I should say. I think Kevin Stefanski is on the hot seat. And I said this to somebody today, and they're like, oh, no, he's okay. How can you blame him? I said, wait a minute. He made the playoffs the first year, and that was a Baker Mayfield. And they have failed ever since. And Stefanski, listen, they didn't blow me away last night. They did not blow me away last night. And you're right. You talk the loss of Chubb is something you can't overcome. I understand that, but I think Kevin Stefanski, the seat's getting a little warm there because I think he was the guy who signed off on Deshaun Watson, and that Deshaun Watson deal has not paid off in any way, shape, or form for the Cleveland Browns.
We are heading into week number 3. The injuries are piling up from week 1 and 2. We saw the Giants running back Saquon Barkley avoid a major ankle injury. Injury looked like it might be 3 weeks. Hey, he could even play on Thursday night. His ankle is feeling better. We'll see what transpires, but the Giants know at least they have Matt Breida in their pocket in case he cannot go on Thursday night. Joe Burrow aggravating his calf injury, an injury that happened in training camp. We don't know if he's going to be able to play on Monday night against the Rams, something to monitor as well. Browning could be a name that could be coming up for the Bengals quarterback if Burrow cannot go. Also, we're seeing more injuries, hamstring injuries. Jamal Williams for the Saints goes down to an injury. You got Deontay Johnson now on IR for 4 weeks. So the injuries are piling up, and it gets more and more difficult for fantasy owners to kind of figure this out. I mean, we mentioned Nick Chubb a little bit earlier. He was a round 1 pick. And the running backs, we talked about it. Saquon, it was going to be Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey. Those were the 4 big running backs, and 2 of the 4 get injured.
I think part of it also, and this is, and I think this is one of the things that, you have to, going forward, the owners want to add one game to the regular season. They want to take away a preseason game. So they want to only have 2 preseason games. Well, as it is now, a lot of the starters are not even playing in preseason, and you're having these injuries. I hate to say this, but and you can't even. There was some people talking about the Rodgers injury because it was on an artificial turf surface. Okay, well, the Saquon Barkley injury was on a natural grass field. Okay, so you can't say that. Pittsburgh's a natural grass field, and the Chubb injury occurred. So I don't know if it's the surface or whatever, but I do think there is something to be said about lack of, preseason injuries are going to happen. You know that. And I think I said this to you, or I've said this on this podcast at some point. We'll need the replay. We'll need that yellow flag. What happened? Replay. But I said this. You don't want to be the guy to take the guy who gets injured. You kind of, you may dodge a bullet, but if you get that bullet and you take that hit, I mean, it's tough to rebound. And like I said, I was all in on Nick Chubb this year. 2 of my 3 teams are now looking down the barrel. That's it. And Deontay Johnson is another player that I took high. And he is on injured reserve. I have Jonathan Taylor still languishing on my IR on one of my teams. I mean, listen, you roll the dice sometimes. You do well, and sometimes you don't. We're now to our favorite part of the show, which we enjoy. In fact, notice I have the Seinfeld shirt on.
Oh, yeah.
I figured it would be a good one to wear tonight. It is time for our imports, exports on the fan. By the way, before I do, I guess I got to mention this real quick because we haven't really talked about it. But you can now find us on YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel, Fantasy Sultans. Just do a search for it, and you should be able to find all the videos are on there, in addition to Spotify for podcasters, which is where we have been from day one. So you'll be able to look at us and find us on YouTube. That was an exciting thing. We finally got that all worked out this week. So again, you can look up the Fantasy Sultans on YouTube, and you can still email us, by the way, fantasysultans@gmail.com. All right. Enough pandering here to the Fantasy Sultans and the pocketbooks. Let's talk about import exports. Mike, you lead off. Who you got on import? Who you got on export?
I'm going to start it off with grabbing running back Zach Moss in Indianapolis. After Deion Jackson struggled in week 1, Moss rose to the occasion, playing on 52 of 53 snaps against the Texans, totaling over 100 yards from scrimmage and scoring a touchdown. His 4 catches on 4 targets were promising as well, being he only had 4 catches in 4 games as the lead back for the Colts last season. Now, Jonathan Taylor, he is eligible to return in week number 5, but with Indy, we still don't know what's going to happen with that situation. How will it play out? At the moment, Zach Moss is the next best thing to slice bread, while Jonathan Taylor is Pete Moss.
And real quick, also, don't forget to mention the Anthony Richardson injury.
Yeah, the concussion.
He's in concussion protocol right now because he went out, and that I think that also plays in this Indianapolis predicament to a certain extent.
All right, next up, we're going to move on to wide receiver Nathaniel Dell of Houston, and it hasn't taken long for the rookie Tank Dell to establish himself as a top option for C.J. Stroud. Of course, you got Nico Collins and Robert Woods as the top options, but moving up the ranks is Nathaniel Dell. He had 7 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown, competing with Robert Woods. The Texans have dropped back the pass 50 times in the past 2 games, despite missing 4 starting offensive tackles. So we're noticing a bit of a trend here in Houston. They like to air the ball out. CJ Stroud, they will do it with him. And I'll tell you what, If you're looking for upside, Nathaniel Dell is your guy. And you know what I got to say about that one? Dude, you're getting a Nathaniel Dell. All right. We move on to another import. And if he's available, you'll find him on waiver wires. That is Russell Wilson in Denver. Threw over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and completed 18 of 32 pass attempts. Also had 56 yards on the ground. Yeah, he's had a pair of turnovers, but I'll tell you what, Russell Wilson overall has looked decent. 5 touchdowns to over 2 games. And looking ahead, Wilson faces Miami this upcoming week, and we know Miami will be high flying with Tyreek Hill and that Miami offense. So look for Russell Wilson. The only way Denver is going to be able to compete, air the ball out, and that's what Wilson is going to do. So he's a good option if you want to pick up somebody. Now, that's on the quarterback end. Now, keep an eye on these players. I'm not saying you should export them right away, but you'll want to keep an eye on them. Cam Akers, I told you, he's on the trading block. We don't know what's going to happen with the Rams. He's something to watch. Of course, Sean McVay, healthy scratch last week, decided to roll with Kyron Williams. He was a big surprise in week 1. I had him on my imports, and I just didn't think that Kyron Williams would rise to the occasion this early with the Rams offense, but certainly he has. And as far as Akers is concerned, if you're an owner, you have got to be a little bit concerned. If he stays with the Rams, I think this is a big export. Now, however, he goes to another location, a la Cleveland, or he ends up with another team that is suffering at running back because of injury, it could benefit you. Moving along, I'm going to export any Patriot offensive receiver not named Hunter Henry. I am a bit concerned with Juju Schuster, just 64 yards over 2 games. What about Devontae Parker? Where has this guy been? 6 receptions, 57 yards for 2 games. Mike Gesicki, only 69 total yards. The only guy that's been there has been Hunter Henry. He's somebody that you could rely on. Yes, Kendrick Bourne, he had 24 PPR points in week number 1, but it wasn't a great week number 2. And even Ramondre Stevenson in New England, out of the backfield, he is not getting the looks that everybody thought he would as well. So this is a bit concerning if you have any Patriot player on offense. Mac Jones at the helm, they are 0-2. It is not looking good. Finally, what is going on with Jerick McKinnon in Kansas City? McKinnon had a huge impact in that Chiefs offense last season, which carried into the playoffs and, of course, the Super Bowl. But what has happened over the last 2 games? Just 3 fantasy points per game. You look at the Chiefs offense with a young and inconsistent receiving core. You've got a dinged up Travis Kelce, and you wonder, why isn't he being involved in the offense a little bit more? He's had plenty of looks on 3rd down, and maybe that's going to translate to something long-term, but in the short term, it has not been good for Jerick McKinnon. The Chiefs offense has yet to find its identity with Matt Nagy.
Yeah, and Isaiah Pacheco could be another part of the problem with McKinnon, because Pacheco has certainly taken over as the workhorse back there in Kansas City. But listen, you just never know what is going to happen. All right, I'm going to go import exports. I'm first going exports, and you already gave away one of mine. You know, we talked about in the offseason Deshaun Watson. We thought this was going to be the year Deshaun Watson was going to show us all what we've all been waiting for. All right, 2 games in, I'm throwing in the towel already. Deshaun Watson just, I mean, looked awful last night. He did not look well. When Chubb went out, it just seemed like Deshaun Watson, he basically sat for about 2 years, not totally 2 years, but he sat basically for 2 years. And I don't know if he gets back to where he was when he was with Houston. And I think that's, there are quarterbacks were at such a premium. Deshaun Watson maybe was drafted ahead of when he should have been. Everybody was buying in on him. I don't think so. I'm throwing in the towel on Deshaun Watson. And the sad part of it is, he shot himself in the foot. I hate to say this. And there are a lot of people who just aren't Deshaun Watson believers, and he's shown nothing in the last 2 games. I think you throw the towel in on him. Another quarterback I am exporting is Justin Fields. It's interesting. Since he took over as quarterback for the Chicago Bears, he's 5-22. 5-22. I thought he would again, he'd be another viable quarterback this year. But 2 games in, this team looks awful. The Bears look awful. And I just don't. They made the trade for DJ Moore. You thought, oh, it's going to help him. He's going to have a good receiver. Wrong answer. I think if you have another quarterback on your team, you may want to think about him, because until Justin Fields shows you something, I'd say the same thing with Deshaun Watson. Until they show you something, I think at this point it might be better off to sitting him out. I mean, but again, I'm putting him on the export list because I just don't think so. Now, I want to flip to my imports, and one of the imports I have definitely is Jerome Ford. He showed in the second half of Monday night's game that he is to be believed. He's going to be the guy who is going to take over right now in that Cleveland backfield, unless they make a deal for a Cam Akers or a Jonathan Taylor, or they bring back Kareem Hunt, although, I mean, he's still out there. They could bring him back very easily because the offense has not changed much, but I don't know if Kareem Hunt is going to be the answer for Cleveland. I mean, you do not replace a Nick Chubb that quickly, okay? But Jerome Ford certainly, opened some eyes on Monday night. And right at this point, if you've got Nick Chubb on your team, you're going to have to drop him. Grab Jerome Ford, because chances are you're going to have a crack at the waivers. I would get him. I think he is somebody who will pay some dividends. Again, he's not Nick Chubb, but he'll do pretty good for you fantasy-wise. And again, we talked about the running back position being the running back position was not very deep in terms of drafts. And now with injuries, it sure as hell ain't deep right at this point. So Jerome Ford would be an answer for you. All right, wide receiver, I want to go with Tutu Atwell for the Rams. And I say this, you were talking about the Rams offense and Cam Akers and the fact he has taken such a dive. Tutu Atwell right now is giving you some fantasy points, and he is somebody who, if you have a Deontay Johnson injury right now, you've got him. Cooper Kupp is out. And right at this point, he's the guy that you can get some viable fantasy points. Now, is he going to be a stud for the rest of the year? I don't think so, but he's a guy who in the short term can probably help you, especially in the Deontay Johnson injury, because he'll be on IR for 4 games. I think he's going to come back. This is not going to be a long-term injury for him. I think he comes back after the 4 games on IR, but I think they moved him off just simply because they needed some roster, some roster flexibility. But Tutu Atwell's a guy to pick up for the Rams, and he's got Matthew Stafford looked pretty good on Sunday. Although again, I'm not ready to hoist the import flag on him just yet. And last but certainly not least, I want to throw in, you mentioned him too, Hunter Henry, tight end. He is the only viable New England Patriot player. And the reason is because he's tight end, and he's the guy Mac Jones uses to dump off balls. And that offensive line for the Patriots is just awful. But a tight end position, and Hunter Henry has shown, he can get the job done. He would be the only viable Patriot player. Tight end is a position that, well, if you have one, you should be okay. But Hunter Henry might be a guy to pick up. It could be an upgrade because we've had a couple of tight ends go down, and we've had some that injuries and some that have been, shall we say, underwhelming so far. So he would be a guy you might want to pick up. And again, Hunter Henry is available. The guys we've mentioned in all throughout our discussions right now are guys who should be available, should be on the waiver wire right now. It's not, I mean, it's still early in the season. And, you might say, and Mike, you might say, why are you giving up on players a couple weeks into the season? And I'll ask you that question. Why are we exporting players? We're only 2 weeks in. I mean, why?
I don't think, well, mine basically is basically a watch list, but I don't think that the NFL is a patient league anymore. Not that it's a what have you
Okay.
done for me league lately
Right.
anymore.
I know. Yeah, you're right.
The patience runs thin, and it also trickles down to us as fantasy owners. We don't have the patience to stick with these guys. Like, again, last season we saw what happened with Cam Akers. Non-existent for games, but when it counted down the stretch, he came to life. And so if you hung on to him, he was gold. But if you dumped him and you couldn't have the patience to hold on to him, and this is the situation that you get into, you have only so many roster spots that you could keep players on. And how long do you want to carry that player who's not performing on your roster? And that's huge.
I'll throw another name in there, Sky Moore for Kansas City.
Yeah.
Because we were high on him in the preseason, and he did nothing the first half of the year. Then he had some nice games down the stretch, and you wanted to get him back again. But I just listen. I think you're right. The NFL is a show me what can you do for me lately type of league, and it can vary. But I think again, Deshaun Watson has yet to show me something. I would, if I was a Deshaun Watson owner or a Justin Fields owner, I would probably go get another quarterback and just maybe put him on the bench just to see, because again, part of it maybe just they need to get their act together to a certain extent. But I'm not sold after 2 games. I'm really not. And I just think, again, there are some other players who we could probably put on the export list, but again, some people have good. You mentioned a couple of players that had really good first weeks and really bad second weeks. A third week is coming up, and we'll see what happens. And of course, then the lovely, and something. I guess this would be a good point to talk about it too. We don't have buys yet, but buys are coming before too much longer, and you've got to look ahead and try and play ahead of the game. Don't try to grab teams, grab, defenses, grab kickers, grab players to fill in for bye weeks. Look ahead, try and get them, because I'll tell you something. It's easier to try and get a team a week early than a week late. And I'm thinking defenses specifically. Kicker, same thing too. If somebody is on the waiver wire, good to grab them a week early. Now, granted, if you don't have the roster space, that's the other part of the issue. But if you have roster space, again, you have an underperforming running back, or, again, if you have an injury or something like that, it may be the time to pick up. But again, you're not going to plan like 3 weeks down the road. You want to plan maybe a week or 2 ahead. So, if you got a bye coming up week 5, and Justin Herbert has a bye week 5, Chargers have a bye week 5, so that'd be a guy I would think about. Week 3, you'll get through week 3, and then maybe think about it for week 4 to pick up a quarterback, because you're going to need a second quarterback. You need a quarterback to fill in for Justin Herbert. You're not going to sit him down. And by the way, the Chargers, man, I'll tell you, talk about coaches in a hot seat. Brandon Staley. I mean, let's face it, this offense has been great, and they're now 0-2. I mean, oh boy. Yeah. The seat's getting awfully warm underneath for him. And again, we're only 2 games in, but as you said, Mike, and I agree with you, it's what have you done for me lately league? And you're in Los Angeles, you're competing with the Rams, the Chargers. That's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. Same thing with the Jets and the Giants. When you have 2 teams in town, or when you have 2 teams in the same town, if one team's doing well, the other team, there's a lot of people talking about it. It's just observation real quick. And again, we are on YouTube, so you want to check us out there, and you can find us on Spotify for podcasters. If you'd like to reach out to the Fantasy Sultans, you can email us, fantasysultans@gmail.com. Also, don't forget my other podcast, Tripp's Take, which you can find on Spotify for podcasters. You can also find it on YouTube. Do a search for Tripp's Take. You will be able to find it. Like the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, give a listen to WTRSradio.com online. All right, Mike. This week is week number 3. Hopefully, if you are 0-2, we've given you information that'll help you get to 1-2. If you're 2-0, hopefully we've given you information that'll get you to 3-0. And if you're 1-1, hopefully you go on the plus side, not the negative side. But we're here to help you. We are the Fantasy Sultans. We give you the information to win your leagues. And as we say, people listen to the podcast and use our words against us. He's the Hall of Famer Mike Scheck. I'm Tripp Rogers. We are the Fantasy Sultans.
And you are not.